Thanks for joining us tonight. I think we're going to wait a couple minutes yet, see if we get some more people to join. Couple housekeeping things. On the right side of the screen, there is a chat window. This is really informal. If you have questions, just type them in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that. There's also a handouts tab in the box on the right, and then you can download PDFs of both of our presentations. So I'm going to start. I want to talk about mostly LRP, some changes to the program this year, and then Randy's going to talk about the markets. I wasn't even paying attention. What did cattle do today?
They finished higher, steady to higher. So it wasn't a bad finish. Feeder cattle were unchanged in the front months, a little higher in the deferreds, and live cattle finished with a little bit of strength, but a little bit off their highs, but still, not a bad finish, I guess, after you see what happened in the grain side of things.
Yeah. I think we'll give it another minute or so, and then we will get started. Like I said, if you just joined us, there is a chat window on the right side. Please ask questions as they come up. We'll keep an eye on that. There's also a handouts tab, and you can download PDFs of both our presentations.
I guess that's one thing I should have done, is had at least the print off of how the markets did close today. I don't even have that in front of me, but I got charts at the end. We'll look at those.
Do you want to get started?
Yep, might as well.
Okay. Thank you for attending tonight. If you do have to step away before we're done, this is recording. We will post this on our app and on our website tomorrow. I am going to talk about livestock insurance, which is mainly going to be LRP. But just to show you, this was producer premium for crop year 2025. The green is LRP and the orange is LGM. So you can see that LRP is far and beyond the most popular livestock product. Feeder cattle leading the way, and then swine, and then the fed cattle. And I'll talk just a little bit about LRP and the lean calves, or LGM. LGM is the other product, not nearly as popular as the LRP. This one provides against loss of gross margin. So we're looking at both what does the price of cattle do and what does the price of corn do from when you book it to when it expires. LGM only has quotes on Thursdays instead of every day the markets are open like LRP. And like I said, we're looking at both cost of feed and the cost you receive when the cattle are sold. And just like LRP, this is coming off CME futures where we get the prices. This is not as popular because you cannot have both LGM and LRP policies insuring the same class of livestock at the same time. And so if you have both, this gets kind of tricky. We've had problems before where someone's had an LGM endorsement and they want to book LRP, but they can't until that LGM endorsement expires. We've done a few over the years. It is just not terribly popular. I don't, Randy, if you want to speak to that, why the LRP is better, why LGM just never caught on as much?
Well, the trouble with LGM, they kind of do the crush, where they figure out, the feeder cattle and what the cost of the feeder cattle are going to be, what the cost of corn is going to be. And then they try to lock in a margin against the live cattle market against it. So you're using, a set amount of feed because they've got that kind of calculated in for what you're going to use for corn. They use the different months that as long as you're there, they split between different contract months. So it gets to be a lot of math that goes into figuring this out and gets pretty complicated when the LRP is just basically this is the level you want to insure. This is the price it's at, and this is the premium. So it makes it so much easier.
So yeah, if you're interested, we will definitely work through that policy with you, book an endorsement if you wish. The other one I want to touch on, they started this 2 years ago. It's called wean calf revenue protection. And they wanted to protect calves up to weaning age. And it's just like revenue protection, corn and soybeans, where they're going to set up an APH based on the weight of the calves. It's only been available in those 4 states. So South Dakota is one of them. North Dakota has not been part of this program. It's a lot of paperwork, which is why it's not very popular. But what they were trying to get across here, and what this does cover calf death due to like a covered weather loss. So that's the one thing that we're getting from this that you're not getting at LRP. This one is not going so well. The first year they sold 26 policies nationwide. Last year it was down to 8. This year it's at 7. Not very much premium out there. And again, if you have calves under the wean calf revenue protection, you cannot insure them on LRP at the same time. And I think mainly with this one, it's the paperwork. Keeping track of all this stuff. At least when I took the training a couple of years ago, you had to let your agent know as the calves were being born. So I don't think it's a policy that really fits with your guys' day-to-day life. So we shall watch that. They may revamp it, they may drop it. We'll just keep an eye on that going forward. On to LRP, which is a popular one. Quick review of this. I think most of you guys know how this works. LRP is just insuring against declining market prices. We can, every day the markets are open, we can book. There's no minimum head. It is federally subsidized. We have feeder cattle and fed cattle. So on the feeder side, we can insure steers and heifers separately, weights going up to 999 pounds. A few years ago, they did add, well, that was called unborn bulls and heifers. I need to fix my slide. And that's been pretty popular, that if you own the pregnant cows, you can get coverage on those calves before they're born. And then we have the fed cattle side, and their steers and heifers are all grouped together. They get the same price. They also added a cull cow coverage a couple of years ago. And this one, we can now go up to 1,600 pounds for the target weight. So if you haven't done LRP before, you can do an application anytime. If you have an LRP policy with an agent, you can only transfer that by July 1. Otherwise, you're locked in for the year. If you're brand new to LRP, you can sign an app anytime. There's no sales closing. Every day the markets are open, we get quotes. 4:30 is the absolute latest. We usually have them by about 2:30 in the afternoon. Those quotes are good until 8:25 a.m. Central the next day. After 8:25, the program shuts down and we're down until the next set of quotes come out. And we just keep rotating like that. Quotes are not available on federal holidays, market holidays. If for any reason quotes aren't out by 4:30, you won't have quotes that day. Cattle and feed report days, we don't have quotes. And any day where the cattle futures are limit up or limit down, we will not have quotes. So this has changed. We used to be able to get signatures after we booked it. They cracked down on that a couple years ago. So now, to book these coverages, I have to enter it in, we do all ours at AgriSample. I have to enter the endorsement in AgriSample's system. I then kick out a document that I have to send you DocuSign. You have to sign it, the agent has to sign it, and then I have to upload it to AgriSample all by 8:25 a.m. And because of that, and the mornings get kind of hectic, I'm always very happy to book it late afternoon, in the evening. I'd honestly rather book it at 7 a.m. than wait until I get to the office at 8, because that 8 to 8:25 is kind of a time crunch sometimes. So just know that's not a impediment. We are very willing to book with you whenever you have the time to get that in. So if you're doing an LRP, there's two things basically we need to know. We need to know what weight they're going to be at when you're going to sell them, what your target weight is, and what date do you want to sell them. For the weight, if you go higher than your target weight, there's no problem with that. So if your target weight's 900 pounds and you sell them at 950, that's not a problem, you're over. But if your target is 900 and they only weigh 850 when you sell them, your claim will be reduced because you did not hit that target weight. For the end date, the only rule is you cannot sell the cattle more than 60 days prior to the end date. Unless you're in a drought situation, then the rules change. You can go after the end date, long as you want, that doesn't matter. This is a quote example. I don't know if you can read this or not. This is 999 steers. This is what I did, I think, last Friday. And in this example, I'm just showing the highest coverage for every week. So 30 weeks would be September. That one you could get like $3,500 worth of coverage for $145 a head. And those prices have gone up a lot, of course, since cattle prices keep going up. And we've had more people now start looking at the other levels, like this 30 weeks here for the 145. The first half of this in white is all of your choices for 30 weeks. So we don't have to do that $145 a head premium. We can lower that down, lower the coverage down a little bit. Because again, the prices are so high, we are seeing some people just say, hey, I'm looking at this target coverage after I subtract the premium. If I get that, I'm happy. And then we can play with those coverage levels a little bit to make that more affordable. This is a real example. One of our customers, we just did this one. This was for unborn bulls and heifers. So these are calves that aren't born yet, and they're going to be sold, or not sold, hit their target weight at the end of October. So on January 26th, the coverage price for these unborn that we're going to take to 550 pounds was $369.52. So you take that times the 10 head times the 550 pounds, that gives you a value of $20,324. So what that's saying is you could insure an unborn calf for $2,032 a head, and it would cost you $88.50 a head. Anything you want to add to that, Randy?
No, I think that's they use a, basically to figure it out, because it's, steers and heifers both. There's a premium that goes onto the steers and a discount that goes onto the heifers on the back side of this. But in the end, it equals about the same as what if we went and did a 550 weight calf for this time frame, half steers, half heifers.
And they added this, I think, 3-4 years ago now. As long as you own the pregnant cows, you can book the unborn before they're born. And that's been pretty popular. So like the one we just did, our end date won't be till this October. But then the next question is, what happens when that end date hits? Takes about a week or so for RMA to come up with all their numbers and figure out what the price was on your end date. If you don't have a loss, we'll send you a form in the mail showing, hey, your coverage was $370 and the ending value came in at $380. You don't have a loss. They just changed. Used to get billed 1 month after it expired. Now you get billed 2 months after the endorsement expires. If there is a loss, we will send you a notice of probable loss. You'll have to sign, attest to the statements on there. And then you have to provide proof that you owned and or sold the cattle. And we'll go over that. So again, this is a real example of somebody that booked, these are fed cattle, 1350s. And we booked this back in October, and the coverage price was $242.93. It ended on January 16th. And that date, the fed cattle price was $232.40. So you subtract those two, it's a difference of $10.53. Take that times the number of head, take it times the target weight. It's a loss of about $11,000. And again, remember that actual ending value, that $232.40, is not the value you receive. It's the value that RMA comes up with. And like I said before, in this case, if 80 head were booked at 1,350 pounds, if your sales receipts only showed 75 head, you will only get paid on the 75 head. Your premium will not be reduced. If the target weight's 1,350 and they came in average of, 1,275, they'll reduce the coverage down too. They'll just do some math and they'll just reduce the number of head down to cover the amount you were short in the target weight. So you do want to be as close as you can be on those numbers. As for those ending values on the feeder cattle side, they're looking at the CME cash settled commodity index prices. And then you have a factor on there, whether it's the weight 1 goes up to $5.99, 6 to 10 is the weight 2, and there are different factors on that times that price. On the fed cattle side, they look at the AMS 5-area weekly weighted average direct cattle slaughter report with those details on that. Anything you want to add to that, Randy? We were just talking about that the other day.
Yeah, we've been kind of discussing this, and it's it's a different price determination used for the feeder cattle and the fed cattle. The fed cattle go off, of course, the 5 states and then they use the weighted averages for cattle on both of them. So it kind of works back, so it gets to be pretty accurate to what the prices are for the calves at the time.
So your end date has expired. We know you have a claim. We send you the form that says what your loss is. And now you have to provide documentation that these cattle actually existed. So for fed cattle or feeder cattle that have been sold, they basically just want sales receipts. No later than 60 days after the end date. You can't hold them more than 60 days. And it needs to show the insured as a seller, which means the names have to match. If I have, Ryan Farms, but I'm selling the cattle under Amy Ryan, that's going to be a problem because my policy name and the receipt don't match. So they need to. And then showing the purchaser, the date sold, and the weight. And like I said before, if you haven't hit your target weight, you haven't hit the number of head, they'll reduce your claim down a little bit. If you had feeder cattle and you did not sell them as of 60 days, you have to sign a statement saying that they were marketable, meaning that they did hit that target weight by the end date, and then documents verifying that you own the cattle. That could be purchase agreements, that could be financing credit documents, it could be a letter from your banker, a letter from your veterinarian. We do all our LRP through AgriSampo, and they have been really, really good to work with. They're not too picky. It can be a really straight 2 sentences from your vet, and they sign it, and they'll accept that as the third party. Just has to be any kind of third party documentation on that. If you have unborn cattle, and you have a claim, at claim time, you have to show you did have ownership in the pregnant cattle. And again, that would be vet reports would probably be the easiest thing to come up with there. This was brand new for 2026. I'm not sure what someone did to get busted for this, but subsidy capture is a new term. Subsidy capture is trying to recover your LRP premium by using futures or options as an offsetting position in close proximity to the date it was booked. When you sign your application, your endorsements now in the fine print, you are giving RMA permission to look at your trading account statements if they think you're doing this. And again, if RMA determines you traded for the purpose of subsidy capture, your claim will be denied. You will still own premium. You will, when you sign off on like the endorsements, you are signing off that you did not do subsidy capture. Anything you want to add to that, Randy?
They're basically looking for anybody who, I think it's like 3 days after having the LRP endorsement put in effect, somebody who's either sold puts or calls to help capture the premium. And they basically want you to have risk. I mean, the reason for doing this is to alleviate risk. So, and kind of stave the risk off onto somebody else. So they don't want you to go in and then put the risk back onto the government by themselves.
And I have to believe that there had to be somebody out there advertising this. I don't know how else RMA would have found out about this, but
I do know there are some that were promoting doing some option strategies to help capture their premiums, and it usually didn't work well.
Yeah. So that's out there. Don't do that. They did kind of expand the language on purchase agreements. If you have purchased the cattle and you have proof you purchased the cattle, you can do an LRP endorsement even though the cattle aren't in your physical possession yet. You just have to take possession no later than 90 days prior to the end date. So that is an option. If you do buy them and you sign some stuff, we can book them then. The last thing they did, they basically gave very specific examples of a drought hardship. So we said earlier, you cannot sell the cattle more than 60 days before the end date. If there is a severe enough drought, they waive that and you can sell them early and you will not be penalized on the claim side. So now we officially are going off this drought severity and coverage index of the county on your policy. And your claim will not be reproduced or reduced if these happen. So if we do get in a drought situation and you're worried about that and you're going to have to move them early, talk to us and we can look this up and see if you qualify for that and can move them without penalty. That is all I have. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to Randy.
Oh, goody. All right. Well,
you should be able to advance it on your own, I think.
You think? Let's see. You're giving me more credit than, let's see. Oh, yes, I figured it out. Okay. I do have to put a disclaimer up just to make us legal, and that just basically that there's risk involved and that past performance is not indicative of future results. So that's the disclaimer. Okay. Looking at I'm just taking a big broad look at what the cattle markets here as of late. You know, we've seen the markets kind of been a little bit more choppy than what we have been seeing in the past. You know, today, like I said, we started the market off with some pretty good gains, but we kind of faded around noon. We did come back and finish steady to a little higher by the end of the day. And a lot of what's going on right now is being focused off of what was happened on Friday. Now, in the big picture, it doesn't really mean anything, and I'll get to that here a little later in the presentation. But basically, Trump came out and said that he was going to quadruple the amount of beef that is going to be allowed to be imported from Argentina. We were allowing 20,000 metric ton a year. Now we're going to allow them to bring in 20,000 metric ton. Besides that 20,000 metric ton, another 20,000 per quarter. So it's going to be up to 100,000 metric ton that we're going to be able to import beef from Argentina. Now, what matters in this is that what's the beef we're importing. We're basically going to import trimmings, and it's going to be hamburger. It's going to be the lower cuts. Nothing of the more expensive cuts are going to be brought in from Argentina. So it's really, again, back to what Trump said a few months ago, where he's trying to bring the cost of the meat for the consumer down. Well, 100,000 metric ton isn't really going to do much, or 100,000 metric ton isn't really going to make much of a difference, because it's a drop in the bucket when you look at it as far as the big picture is concerned. Now, we'll see how things go going forward. I mentioned in a presentation, I believe it was on Friday night in Carrington, that what scares me the most is what could happen if we start allowing kind of unfeathered imports coming from Brazil. That's what scares me the most right now. Or if we look at opening the border to Mexico. Now, a couple of weeks ago or last week, we did find another screwworm case, but this time it was in I believe an imported horse from Argentina had the screwworm larvae in it. Well, the protocols worked. They inspected the animal, they found it, they quarantined it, so nothing got out into the public. Nothing. No, there's no issue because of it going through the quarantine process. But we're also looking at now releasing a bunch of the sterile flies a little farther north in Mexico, and that tells me they're trying to create a little bit more of a buffer zone to allow, to at some point open up this border. This administration's purpose is to bring the cost of groceries or food down for the consumers, and that's what scares me a little bit about what could be the next black swan or the next big thing that happens in this market. When you look at the reports that have come out, fundamentally, right now there does not appear to be a single thing fundamentally that can come in and hurt this market. It's going to be something that happens that we've created, or that is going to be done because of political reasons that we see a little bit of issue coming into play. So as far as the cattle numbers look, I mean, they're friendly, they're bullish, and it's going to take some sort of an outside black swan to change this. Looking at the numbers now, look at the cattle on feed report that came out in January. The placements came in a little bit higher than what we were anticipating, about 2% more placements than we thought, but it's still very low placements. I mean, we're still not looking at very many animals. I'm struggling with finding that. We're still not looking at a lot of animals coming into play as far as being into our feedlots or, there it popped in. So now when you look at the number of feed as of January 1, you can see that it's the lowest number that we've had placed in our feedlots in 9 years. As far as placements, it's the lowest placements we've had in 10 years. So we continue to struggle as far as, the number of cattle in our feedlots and placing cattle. With Mexico, with the border being closed there, that's 1.2 million cattle a year less that are coming into the U.S. And that's kind of helping kind of foster the problem that we've been seeing as far as the cattle market is concerned, besides the tightening of the herd ourselves. Marketings were a little bit better this last month. We actually had a little bit more numbers actually come to or go to the processing plant. Doesn't mean that we're looking at a big increase as far as the meat hitting the market is concerned. It's just that we had a little bit better numbers coming to the marketing. As far as the heifers, right now, when you look at the number of heifers that are in the feedlot, this is done on a quarterly basis. This chart shows us, and it shows that those numbers have been fluctuating back and forth, but we've continued to been somewhat static with the number of heifers going into the feedlot, telling us that we're not looking at a lot of retention as far as the heifers are concerned. Now, there is a little bit that is going on, but it isn't as much as what has been expected or was estimated for the cattle inventory report. When you look at the number, the percentage, we've been running pretty close to this here all year, and that is running at about 38% of the cattle in the feedlot have been heifers. The other 62% have been running as steers. So that hasn't really changed this year. And that in this January cattle on feed report gave us an indication that we're not seeing a very big number of heifers coming back and coming into the breeding herd. Cow slaughter, the red line basically shows where the average has been at. The dark blue solid line shows where it was for 25. And we can see that we're not bringing as many cows to slaughter either. So it tells us that we're trying to push the herd as long as or aging the herd out as much as we can and keeping them as long as possible to keep having calves. So we're really not seeing anything that's being able to get bred and have a calf is basically doing that. When you look at the all cows and heifers, the slaughter as a percentage of the total slaughter, look at the all cows, it's still running on average for this year and then been decreasing at about 16%. Heifers have been coming in as the number of all slaughter at about 32%. And again, it's down just a little bit this last year. It tells us that we're trying to keep them around the herd a little bit longer. Looking at the cattle inventory report, I mean, that was a little bit on the bullish order when you look at the numbers. I would say that it was, extremely friendly. I wasn't quite using the term bullish just because. But when you look at it, first take a look at what they did with the previous reports. USDA came in and revised those numbers down. So we actually had less cattle coming in to the report than what we had anticipated because both the January and the July cattle inventory reports had reductions brought in. So not only did we see a little bit of a cut from the report, but we actually had less cattle coming in than what we anticipated. So that started the report off a little bit more on the friendly order to begin with. Either my patience isn't very good or there it comes in. Okay, now looking at the all cattle and calves, this is dairy, this is calves, it's everything coming into play. We did see about a 0.4% reduction in the cattle herd as far as the U.S. was concerned, still sitting at, I believe this is 1961 lows. You can see the number in the bar in red is where we're sitting at with our cattle herd right now. This goes back all the way to 1950. So yes, 1951 actually is what the cattle herd is the smallest since. I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself even. Looking at where we saw increases and decreases, everything in blue showed an increase in cattle and calf numbers. Everything in red showed a decrease. Interesting that you did see up in the northern plains, we've had a little bit better moisture, but we did see, increases in the numbers in Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and in Minnesota. Not big numbers, but they still did see a little bit more of an increase. North Dakota actually was one of the bigger ones at a 3% increase as far as all cattle and calves. When you look at it as far as the stock cows, we saw a 0.3% decline, or 1% decline as far as the beef cows. All cows and calves and heifers to calf were down about 0.3. Milk cows were up a little bit, and that kind of skewed the number as far as the number of cows completely. But we're looking at less beef cows into the herd. And when you look at it, the red bar shows it's the tightest numbers since back to I believe this is 1961, where these the tightest that the cattle herd has been at. Again, that doesn't mean production, but it just means that the numbers are some of the tightest. When you look at as far as dairy is concerned, that really hasn't changed here since in the mid 90s. So that number continues to be a little bit low as well. Beef cows, 1% reduction, lowest since 1961, as I mentioned. But I took this one step further and just took a look back and just to see where the top 10 states and then also the rest of the U.S. just to figure how many cattle we've lost over a time frame. And the numbers I've got here, the years and then the numbers inside are the number of cattle, beef cows in that state. The top 10 states, if you look at it just from the years from 2020 to 2026, we lost 2.4 million head. As far as the U.S. is concerned in that time frame, we lost 3.7 million head. That's a big number when you look at it. And just about for the most part, most years or most of them did see decreases. When you look at as far as the states are concerned, Texas was the largest one seeing the biggest decrease at almost 500,000, though the rest of the states kind of all fell in behind. And when you look at it as far as the top 10 states that have cows, Texas is by far the largest one, almost doubling the next closest one, which is Oklahoma. What's interesting is what we saw also for Texas and Oklahoma for winter wheat seedings this year is that both those states saw the largest increases in winter wheat acres, which was kind of surprising. Oklahoma increased their winter wheat acres by 650,000, while we saw Texas increase theirs by 100,000. And I think a lot of that was due to the fact that they were looking at wanting to have a little bit more some ground to be able to graze some yearlings on. So I think that's kind of the purpose of why we saw those increases as far as winter wheat is concerned. But you can look at these and you can see the blue line is this year's for 2026. And you can see some of the states are seeing some small increases, nothing major as far as anybody is concerned. But most of them or all of them are still quite a bit behind what we saw from even 2022. When you look at the heifers, the all heifers 500 pounds and over were down 0.6. The beef cow replacements, though, were up by 1%. So we are actually seeing some heifer retention, 1%. That's not a big number. We're actually selling more and pulling more out of the herd than what this is going to replace. The average trade guess had this coming in close to about 2 to 3%. So you can see that it was a little bit disappointing in the big picture as far as the market was concerned, and tells us that the cattle market should be able to stay strong, or that we're not rebuilding it right now, and that it should continue to have some strength here for at least 1 to 2, possibly 3 more years before we start to see that number increase quite a bit more. Now, once we start to see heifer replacement increase more, that's going to take more cattle away from the feedlot. So that's going to kind of compound our problem once we start moving forward with seeing the increase in numbers. Beef replacement heifers, this is up only 0.9. It's still the lowest since 1949 as far as numbers are concerned. Whoops. And when you look at it for the states that saw the beef replacement, Texas was the largest that had the most replacements kept. Oklahoma had a few. North Dakota, which is way over here, had just a small amount. So we're showing that we're keeping some heifers back. Same with Montana and Nebraska. But you do see that some of these states are looking at a little bit less. So I think out of the top 10 states, there was 6 that are seeing heifer retention this next year. This doesn't mean they're going to be kept all the way to calf and they go into the breeding herd. It just means right now we've got a few more heifers that could have the potential of calving. And like I said, when you look at the number of beef cows added to the herd, it's only coming in at just a little over 2 million on a yearly basis this year, or for last year. A lot less than what we've seen over the previous years. Calf crop continues to decline. Of course, if you got less mothers, less mother cows, you're gonna have less calves. The January to June numbers were down about almost 2%, 1.6. Total was down at 1.6. So we're seeing less calves, which means that there's going to be less going into the feedlot as well. 7th straight year that we're seeing lower calf crop numbers. And this gets to be kind of interesting when you look at this. This breaks down, what we're looking at as far as the steers and bulls, the ones over 500 and then the calves under 500. But steers 500 pounds and over were down about 0.6. That's kind of in line with what we saw on the heifer side as well. But the bulls 500 pounds and over was up actually 0.3%. So it shows that we're, guys are keeping bulls for breeding purposes a little bit more than what we normally would. And then calves under 500 kind of rings with what we saw with the calf crop being down just a little bit. So annual production. Now, this is where numbers kind of get to be interesting, is when you start looking at what production's at, where consumption's at, exports. And I did some playing around with some of the charts, and they somewhat get interesting here when you start looking at it. You can see that, we always talk about the 10-year cattle cycle, and you can kind of see that here as far as the production is concerned. 2015, we bottomed out. We built the numbers back up again quite nicely all the way to about 2022, and we've seen it drop since then. What was interesting, between 23 and 24, we are actually anticipating production to be lower in 24 than 23, but something came into play that pushed that production up, and then we got to be about equal with 23. And that was, we started to feed the cattle more, and we started to see much heavier slaughter weights, as carcass weights, as far as the steers and the heifers were concerned. And that is also spilled over into 25, which is keeping a little higher than what was anticipated to begin with. Now, here's another look at it. Basically, as you can see, 23 and 24 are equal to each other. We had a big drop in 25, a lot lower numbers. And for 26, the estimate is another drop as far as production is concerned. So both 25 and 26 are estimates right now. We should be getting a pretty good idea, though, for 25, but 26, of course, is definitely just a little bit of a estimate for the most part, depending on where the calf crop comes in the spring. But overall, we are still continuing to see a little bit of a downturn as far as the production is concerned. When you look at consumption's still pretty good, and I think they're even a little bit light. When you look at it now that the food pyramid has flipped upside down, and they're trying to push more protein, more meat, as far as the government is concerned, to the consumer. This might come in and help increase some of our, for dietary reasons, increase the demand for beef a little bit. I think RFK was at the Cattle Con last week. He was telling cattle producers to save all your heifers, increase the breeding herd, because good times are coming yet. So basically saying you need to expand to meet the demand that's going to be coming from the U.S., because we're going to switch to a higher protein source as far as the food pyramid is concerned. We did see a little bit of a drop over the last couple of years, about 0.1%. We were at 59.1 pounds per person consumed of beef in 24, dropped down to 59 in 25, and now we're at about 58.9 for 26. Again, these are just estimates, but it'll be interesting to see what the food pyramid does with that now that that's been released. Part of what I wanted to show on this is that looking at what, as far as where our exports are at and our imports, and what the influence has been having, especially with all this talk with what's going on with Argentina. And I found this to be pretty interesting. Back in 2015, 2016, we were actually importing more beef than we were exporting. Then for a long time, we got to be about level, when you look at the years from 27 or 17 all the way up to about 22, we imported as much as we exported. I mean, basically it was a comparative advantage, you might say, as far as exports are concerned. We imported what we needed to, which is likely most of the time it's trimmings and ground beef and butcher cows. And now all of a sudden, though, we're seeing a big increase because our production is dropping. Our prices have gone up. Our exports have slowed down. They're still good, but they've slowed down a little bit. And that has caused us to have to import a little bit more just to make ends meet as far as our consumption and as far as our demand is concerned. So it's interesting the last 4 years what we've seen as far as the import and exports of the beef market. And this is all meats. It's not just certain cuts. I wanted to put together just to see what our production and what our use has been at. The blue line shows where beef production has fallen, and the orange line is our use. So you can see that just about every year, other than it looks like 21, 22, our production was bigger than what our use was. But now lately, the last 3-4 years, we've been seeing use outpace the production, which then we have to fall back on imports to kind of make up the difference. And you can see where the imports have started to grow to kind of help make up for that. To show that a little bit different is the orange line basically is production and imports. That's total supply, and it shows where our use is at. And when you put the two combined together, it shows that we have a little bit of an ending stocks estimate for beef each year. And I guess you can say that it hasn't really been increasing because we've been seeing use increase as the years have been going, and production's been somewhat stable. So I did not put one together for where our ending stocks estimate is at, but kind of interesting when you look at where the production and where the imports and exports and use kind of come into play. Looking at it, and as I mentioned, just because we have low numbers doesn't mean the production isn't there. And you can see that starting at about 75, 76, we did have inventories and production increasing together, but then production kept increasing, whereas inventory started to drop since that mid 70s timeframe. And right now we're sitting at quite a gap between the two. And a lot of that is just because we've become a lot more efficient and we've increased the weights quite a bit. This breaks down basically what our steer dressed weights have done on an annual basis. And right now we're sitting at an all-time record, somewhere around that 950, 960 pound area. And you can see the increase that we've had since 1967, where it's been a nice steady climb as far as the dressed weights are concerned. So we're bringing a lot more beef onto the market with what the animals that we are producing right now. And that's kind of needed because of the demand that's been increasing and the numbers decreasing. As far as charts are concerned, technically, we've been looking for this market to come back and try to close this gap that was created back here in late October. It looks like we're close to closing that gap right now. We're not quite there yet. We need to get looks like possibly another $5-6 to be able to close that. Once we close that, I would expect that we would see a little bit of a retracement in this market just to kind of test to see if this is rally to close that gap and go to new highs is for real. I would expect we would drop this market maybe back down to that 360 area, which would take us to right about this line. If that holds, then we would see this market go back to new highs. And that's kind of the scenario I expect us to see in the feeder cattle market. I don't think we're done rallying in this market. I do think we are going to make a test and see new highs before this is over. As far as the live cattle are concerned, we have not seen as much enthusiasm in the live cattle market as what we have in the feeder cattle market. Right now, there's not a lot of incentive to finish cattle where the prices are at. That has to come back around so that there gets to be an incentive to finish the cattle. But we've just barely got up to any technical level right now. It's going to be a little bit harder stretch for the live cattle market to get here, but they've got to come up and test. Oh, it looks like about that 246, 247 area. Cash is trading up in that region right now. So this is the February contract. You would expect it to go up there and test that just because cash is there. So if we can test that level, I would still expect a little bit of a retracement, maybe test back down to where we're about now before we see this market make another run for new highs. But right now, like I said, the biggest obstacle we've got is likely going to be ourselves with or the news that's coming into the marketplace that's trying to depress the prices as far as the grocery store is concerned. And that's causing the speculators and the hedge funds to be a little bit more nervous on holding their long positions as far as the market is concerned. I do think fundamentals will win out and continue to keep this market firm. If we do see some sort of a sell-off, it's not going to be one that's sustainable because in the end, it's going to be tight supplies and strong demand that's going to keep this market firm here for a couple more years. The biggest obstacles I see that could really disrupt the marketplace would either be the border opening with Mexico prematurely, or we start to see some sort of another black swan come into play. We get the screwworm comes into the U.S., or we start bringing in massive imports out of Brazil. That would be another one that would kind of cause some problems. So, but I think that is what I've got. If there's questions, comments, concerns, thoughts.
Yep, if you have questions, put them in the chat. My question for you, Randy, has USDA said anything about what they want to see before they would reopen the border? Do they have like any bullet points of what they need to have happen?
They would like to see the number of cases slow down as far as the new outbreaks with the screwworm down in Mexico. I believe right now, last time I checked, which was about a week ago, 10 days ago, there was about 11 active cases still about 200 miles south of the Mexican-US border. And I think they want to see those get down into a lot lower numbers than basically not having any for a while before they would consider it.
We do have a question. Does Brazil have the excess inventory to export?
You know, right now, I mean, it's tight for them. I mean, that's actually a good question, and that's something that we got to look into. Right now, a lot of their beef is going to China. So they don't have a lot that they can kick over to the U.S. At this point, but there's that thought that because of the agreement, that they would bring some our direction and then hopefully fill in a little bit, have China fill in with some other sources to be able to fill in with their beef. So at this point, no, they don't. But their cattle herd is increasing slightly at this time as well. So they have enough to bring us, and I can't remember the number, but it's a small amount, but they do have some that they could divert to us in the short term, but it wouldn't be much and it wouldn't be long-standing.
I don't see any other questions out there. Like I said before, if you go to the handouts tab on the right side, you can download the PDF of my slides and Randy's slides if you want that for reference. And we will be posting the video online tomorrow. And with that, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for attending tonight. Any questions? Just give us a call at the office. Thanks.
Thanks.